I got a call one day from this businessman. He had purchased a database program for tracking field training. He wanted to meet and see if I could help him and his new programmer work through some kinks. Sure, why not? The businessman was forgettable. That young programmer was not. He was a kid getting ready to graduate from Indiana University with a computer degree. Interestingly enough, he had also completed the Indiana University Police Academy, the same academy I had graduated from many years earlier. So we talked through the system, what it did well, what needed to change, and the future of this type of technology in law enforcement. Throughout the meeting, I could see the kid struggle. He asked a number of questions, mostly of the why variety. We finished the meeting, and as we were packing up, that young programmer looked at me with a pained expression. Why did we do it this way? This makes no sense at all. The only thing that popped in my mind was John McClane from Die Hard. Welcome to the party, pal. That was my only response. It's time to start telling our own stories. I'm Steve Kellams, and welcome to Blue Canary. That kid turned out to be a former policeman and now owner of Agency6060, one of the best electronic database systems for tracking field training on the market, and a good friend, Matt Molter. What does technology in law enforcement look like for us in the future? That's the story we're telling on this episode. Matt, welcome to the show officially for the first time. Before we talk about the future, let's take a step back. Can you tell us a little bit about Agency360 and how far it's come from those early days?
So I was always interested in making things better and frustrated with the technology we were using. At my department, I was the computer guy. Back then, we didn't have many of those. Now I'm guessing there's probably like 5 on every shift. But everyone called me back then for whatever kind of computer problem they had, whether it was, how to log in or forgot their password, how to copy and paste, all of that kind of stuff. I get calls on my days off, calls in the middle of the night. From guys wanting help. One day in particular that I remember, someone called and asked for my help with something. And I went to the guy's car. It was late at night. He was at the end of his shift, and you could tell he was just spent. He was exhausted. He had just got done with probably some tough calls, trying to get the reports done so that he could go home. And this guy was essentially just about in tears because he'd been trying to get this computer software to do his thing for over an hour before he finally called me. And it was at that point that I just thought, well, lucky for this guy, he's at the end of the shift. But imagine those frustrations that guys and gals are having before their next call, in between calls. And software can really make a difference in these people's lives. And that was the state of things a number of years ago. We get kind of lost in excitement for the technology as opposed to, does it really solve the problem? That's why we started Agency360. I mean, the first problem we saw very clearly was field training and the onboarding process and all the documentation and paperwork that goes with that. And who in this job, by the way, gets into it because they love all of the paperwork.
Yeah, that's usually not the first choices there. It's like, I want to be a cop to do paperwork.
Right. So the more we can make that easier, the better we can make the job. And that's our ultimate goal, is to make public safety a great place to work and to give the folks that are working in there the tools to make that happen.
I always tease that cops are lazy. They work so hard not to do any work a lot of times. And if you have a system or a process that's difficult or hard to get into, or as you talked about being frustrating and you can't get it to work, they just won't do it. And then it doesn't get done. And if you have a system that is simple and easy and it's quick to get in and get information in there properly, guys are like, oh, okay, I can do this. And I see that when you have a system that's easy, people use it. And that's one of the things I always loved about your system is it was easy, it was intuitive, and guys used it.
I appreciate that you noticed that. Those things take lots of weeks and hours, and it's not easy. To make something simple is actually really hard. It takes lots of iterations. And, just as an example, I think we're on version 8 of our product.
So are you where you want to be then, or do you have a lot of plans in the future for Agency360 for what you're doing?
Oh, we're just getting warmed up. So
that's good to hear.
I mean, in all honesty, there's lots of innovation going on in this industry, especially with us being in the news over the last year. There's lots of tech people and entrepreneurs out there trying to innovate and come up with new solutions. But in our industry, it's almost impossible for the small guy to get a foothold. The environment is so difficult for small companies. Most of them end up dying. If you go to IACP or National Sheriff's Association or any of those conferences, you'll see it. Small companies, gets a bunch of funding, shows up in the vendor hall, and then 1 or 2 years later, they're gone. And it's unfortunate for our industry because we could use some good tech, but the way the industry is run, the little guys have a uphill battle.
Why is that? With the good innovation, I'm sure they're bringing interesting products to the market. But how come they're not being successful?
Well, first off, it's the long sales process. What I think a lot of people don't realize is unless they're ready to buy, which then it's a little shorter, the process to purchase is long, arduous, and you have multiple layers to go through. So I did a bid for a software for the city of Philadelphia a number of years back. And this was in 2016. And the contract was 52 pages.
52 pages. What were you selling them?
Just field training software. The same field training software we'd sold to 500 other agencies. But
sounds like 52 pages. Sounds like you're buying their first child.
Yeah, no, 52 pages. Like you needed a lawyer to go through this. And worse is there's sections in there for the Y2K clause.
But didn't you say you were selling this in 2016?
Correct.
So why are they worried about a computer bug that happened in the year 2000?
You're spot on. This is what I'm talking about.
Finding you speechless just answered the entire question there, right? Okay. All right. I see what we're talking about. You're talking about big bureaucracies that don't even know what they want, and they're still stuck in the Stone Age banging rocks together, right?
You've got the IT department. So, when we purchase something, we've got to get legal review. We've also got the IT department review, and the IT department lumps us in with custom built software in the 90s. And we have to go through all of that process. And when you count the man hours, you could go 9 to 12 months before you finally get paid. And most small companies just can't do that. And in our example, when I first started Agency 360, it was called Design PD at the time. I went almost 5 years without a paycheck.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah.
So that long sales process then really slows down the ability for these companies to get products out there into the market so people can use them and see them. What about budgets? We're talking about the defund police right now is the big thing, and recognizing that the majority of law enforcement budgets, 90% of those budgets are in salaries. There's not a lot of extra money for stuff. And obviously technology falls into that stuff category. Are you being affected by those budgets? Are you seeing those issues and problems?
Sure. It depends on where you're at in the country. Some parts of the country, not so much. Others, for sure. Yeah. Money's a huge part of it. Is the latest technology always the cheapest?
Yeah, I would say no.
No. Is the best technology always the cheapest?
I'm going to go with no again. Hopefully I'm 2 for 2.
And sometimes the decision-making process, especially when the leadership isn't very tech savvy, a better software experience means less training. It means less training of people now. It means less training of people in the future. It can really make some long-term benefits. But for a lot of people who aren't tech savvy that are making these decisions, software is just a commodity. And they have a hard time telling the difference and go with the cheapest option.
Now, obviously, software is where you guys come from, but I would say in software and in hardware, those neat tools or toys even, do you see agencies afraid to be the first one to do it?
Yes, that's a great point. The first question you get is who else is using you? If you're new in this industry, that question is really hard to answer. As you have to be honest and say, well, nobody, or one person 2,000 miles away from where you are. The appetite for risk isn't there, especially for people making the decision.
No one got fired for buying IBM, but how many people got fired for buying ABC that doesn't exist anymore? Nobody got fired for buying IBM because it was successful. But what about all the ones that weren't successful, all the ones that don't exist and no one knows about? That is probably the biggest reason why people are afraid of them, right?
Well, that's true, but there are some successes out there, and you just have to evaluate whether this product and the organizations need to help these companies. If you find a really good product and you want it to stick around, you need to help support that company, because standing out and lasting in the GovTech industry is really challenging.
So how can agencies that want to see more technology, that want to see more innovations on that tech side, whether it be software or hardware, how can they help support the companies out there trying to provide that to them?
Don't be afraid to promote them, to talk about them, to do testimonials, to talk about your experience. Those are a couple, because if other people don't buy it, the company's going to die. I mean, it's a simple fact of the matter. If they don't catch on and whatever the product is doesn't continue to sell, it's not going to make it. I mean, it's changing. There's some great companies out there that are fighting against the mold. Our company, one of them. So there are options out there. But before, when you and I were officers, there weren't even options.
Oh yeah, no, it's that was old school police work, and when we look at some of the stuff that's out there now, and like I said, the stuff that your company's bringing in, everything from the online assessment tools, the onboarding type tools, the live blogging or sharing of information and real time type information back and forth, whether it be through mobile data terminals, and all of the new video and video cameras and the gathering of information from that stuff is. I mean, we are so far ahead from where we were. None of that existed. I was lucky to have a big flashlight. That was it. That was my technology back then.
And it didn't always work either.
No, it didn't work. That was the problem. I'd have to bang it around on things to get it to turn on.
Well, the crazy thing, Steve, is that we're still not into modern technology. So even though we've got all that great stuff, we're still living in like the early 2000s.
So speaking of which, what are some of those misconceptions then that the public has of the technology and law enforcement? Because I think that they watch CSI and think that we have all this great technology and stuff, and we don't. Where are we at technology wise?
Well, here's part of the problem. Part of the problem is the reason why things don't work like they do on TV is because they're not structured that way.
You mean I don't solve the crime in an hour?
No, but also the technology that people buy, like we spend, these industries, we spend millions of dollars on software. What we end up doing is just replicating the old paper people process. And so in some ways, we're not improving things at the speed that they should be in 2020 because we're just replicating how we used to do it on paper.
So what you're saying is we're not innovating. We're simply taking what we used to do with a pen and paper and we're just putting it into a computer. And we're doing it the same way in a computer that we did it on pen and paper.
Yeah. So there's not a lot of innovation there. And I think that's where the future is going to be. Once agencies and governments and everything can get away from those paper models in their head, you're going to see a lot more innovation in the speed of how things happen.
I'm curious about technology in the future. Like, where should we be? What should we see? What do you think we're going to see in technology and law enforcement in the future?
Well, one, I hope that we see less paper-based models. But back a little bit to your earlier questions about misconceptions. Remember when we used to work the road, you pull somebody over and you take their license and you go back to the car and they think you know everything about them.
Right. Yeah.
They don't know that you really have access to absolutely nothing.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing is, though, there is a lot of information on individuals out there. We just don't have access to it at the car, right?
No, not at all. I mean, you think about if your spouse, girlfriend, whoever goes and buys a pregnancy test somewhere, all of a sudden they're inundated with diaper ads. You get a nice little coupon book in the mail. You go online and you see ads everywhere. That's because all these companies are tracking all of that.
Well, and they're not just tracking your purchasing. These cell phones are tracking your conversations. And I think what you're saying is really important, right? Because when we go and sit in those cars, these businesses that sell you something, they know everything about you. But the police know nothing about you. I mean, we can barely sometimes even get your driving record back, much less anything else about you. Yet a company that buys and sells things knows everything about you.
We're so far behind the curve in terms of merging that information and being able to do something with it. These private companies have really taken it to a whole new level.
Now, do you think there's some privacy issues there? Is it a good thing we don't have access to that?
It depends on the information. I mean, we don't even have access to other things that are in the government. So.
Oh, yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. I was giving you a nice big moral type question, but you're absolutely right. Is that we don't know that someone has a business license when we do that.
No, we don't even know that they have a firearms license. We have literally no information.
It sounds like one of the big things from a technology standpoint we need is more information or at least access to it. And that should be easy for us to get, right?
Well, you would think. The other problem here, and just talking big picture, just from my 20 plus years looking at this stuff, is the public safety market is saturated with companies, and we're all competing for those government contracts and dollars. And what's happened is there's a lot of siloed ecosystems. And you think about your CAD, your RMS, and all of those things. Most of these companies, at least the big popular ones, don't let anybody else in. They don't let third party, software tools in or anything like that. And there's no set standard. I'm certainly not advocating that we legislate or regulate these things a bunch, but boy, it would be nice if we could create a set standard that all software tools are required to have so that they can communicate with each other.
One of the problems that I run into with agencies that have, particularly with the field training, since I train so much of it, and when I look at their field training computer-based systems, a lot of them have those because they're part of their bigger CAD RMS system. And when I look at them, they were very clearly just a click add-on. No thought was given into it. It doesn't actually do the job you need it to do with regards to tracking the field training and the onboarding. But because it's part of that bigger CAD RMS system, these agencies are kind of stuck with it because they already purchased it. It was already part of this big, huge package that they received. And by not being allowed to work with other types of software, they can't pick and choose. It's not a la carte, right? And I think that's part of the issue you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, they spent 5 figures at least, probably, for a fill-in PDF template, where you could use companies like ours who specialize in this kind of stuff and we're passionate about it. So wouldn't it be great if a government entity, a police department, could use both and let them all talk to each other?
We've talked about information, how the officers can grab that information with the speeds of the hardware platforms and the cellular connections now going up. I don't know, 5G, 6G, or we had 11G now. I'm not sure where we're at yet. But as we see these things go up, do we envision a time where an officer could be wearing, say, goggles that would provide that information right there? Is that down the road for officers? Can they be wearing a pair of glasses that has the information that would typically be on their computer systems in their cars right at their fingertips, so to speak?
The tech is there. In fact, it's not even new. A lot of this is like trying to figure out what's the best use cases, how to get the information in there and whatnot. I mean, even big companies are struggling. Virtual reality has been around for forever. It's like almost right about now, we're starting to find some good use cases for that sort of thing.
I envision for officers, I see all these different toys and the integration capabilities that as you said, that we have right now. And looking at old technology, even, things from drones to those virtual reality glasses to body cameras and body armor to remote charging of items, the external carriers and body armor that officers are wearing and being able to incorporate all this in there. The electric cars, I think we've got GM saying that they're going to do away with the gas-powered engine by 2025 or something like that. It just seems like with all this technology, how come I can't get into my electric car wearing my external body armor that completely charges all my devices while sitting in the car, uploading all of the tickets and case reports and videos from the day while downloading all new information that might be coming in, all synchronized into my virtual reality glasses that I'm wearing, my body cameras and tasers and everything else all ready to go to do the job. It's like a little RoboCop thing. And all that you're saying we've got, but we can't use any of it.
I mean, I think it'll come. But what I'm really excited about, too, is the automated driving. Now, it's not ready yet, but people are working really hard on it. And if we get that down, you can just imagine for police departments, that means traffic enforcement will be non-existent.
Yeah, because as you say that, and I think about it, you can program into these auto-driving vehicles all the traffic laws. They obey all the traffic laws, and we have to enforce those traffic laws to keep people safe. But once that technology gets perfected, then yeah, you don't have to spend a lot of time writing driving tickets anymore. Heck, you won't even have to spend time writing parking tickets because they won't be parking where they're not supposed to either.
Correct. It'll be all handled by some supercomputer algorithm. Way around. Now there'll still be car accidents and maybe police departments will still investigate those, but down the road, it's probably going to be more like an FAA kind of thing. Just imagine all we hear about is the recent shark attack or whatever is in the news. But I mean, we as police officers, we know how many injuries and lives are changed by car accidents every day. And if we can get this automated driving thing down, it's really going to change our life. Now, there's always going to be people that abuse it, and we're still going to need police officers to go after people that screw up with things. But Traffic enforcement might be a thing of the past in 10 years.
Wow, that just got a lot of people really excited. There's a lot of cops very excited about not having to worry about that anymore. So, Matt, when you left, you worked for an officer for 12 years. That's a lot of time vested in this career. That's a lot of your heart and soul and blood and sweat into being a law enforcement officer. What made you leave?
Yeah, I mean, it was the internal stuff, and I could tell this story. I got frustrated internally, and at the time, people with my skills and the way I was thinking, departments weren't used to dealing with millennials at that time, and communication was not the best. And I felt like the organization didn't care at the time. And then, sure enough, I ran into my former chief a few years after I left, and it was just fascinating to flip the script and realize they did care. They cared a lot. But that message just wasn't trickling down through all the layers, through all the miscommunication, through all the bureaucracies, through all the policies. It just wasn't communicating down. That's our mission at Agency 360 now, is to prevent those good people from leaving by helping the administration be clear and communicate they care.
The officers leaving the agencies in droves right now aren't necessarily because of all of the external factors or pressures taking place. It's because the internal ones.
It's poor relations with the supervisor. It's rules that don't make sense, expectations that aren't clear. I mean, we could
go on and on.
I'm sure you've got lots of stories there.
Oh, yes, I do.
Performance evaluations, for example, where one supervisor cares about one thing, another supervisor cares about another.
As I go around and train that across the country, I always ask people, have you guys ever been trained on how to do your performance evaluations at your department? And it's a resounding no. They're all just kind of given this form saying, hey, fill this out. And then they leave. And so every individual gets to fill it out the way they feel like it should be filled out, with no department standards whatsoever. And that just builds into everything you've been saying.
Well, even worse, Steve, sometimes it's not even controlled by the police department. The same form they give to the mayor's secretary or
human resources, HR, as I like to call them, Satan. They will provide that paperwork to them that they have to fill out.
So we're judging police officers, the same way we judge the lawn mowing crew.
Right. In many instances, we pay them the same. So it's only fair.
There's a lot more risk with the public safety, though.
There really is. And it can make such a huge difference, because those agencies that are taking all those steps to deal with those internal problems, to make sure that their employees understand how important they are, to make sure the employees understand that the agency cares, that the community cares, are really seeing the benefits from this. In 2020, after the George Floyd incident and rolled into the whole COVID thing, I know a number of agencies that were telling their officers to not do any work, to not do police work, to sit on station. But whatever they do, don't do any police work. They didn't want to be on CNN. They didn't want anybody angry. They didn't want to protest. They didn't want anybody sick. And what they did is they took, for months now, an agency that's not allowed to do their jobs. What they've just done is trained all of their employees to not work. You can't flip that switch and turn that back on. And then you recognize just how devastating this becomes in an entire community without proper law enforcement, because they are designed to meet the community needs. And by not having that, you get these big problems that we're already seeing all over the country, and it's got to change.
I mean, my experiences are a little biased, because people that are interested in us are interested in change.
Absolutely.
So we talk to a lot of folks who are passionate about this change, are working hard at it. And that's what excites me for the future, is the people that are choosing this line of work. I think in the future, they're going to be going to a great environment. I was thinking, well, if you're looking for a job right now, where would you go? You'd first go to Google and you'd Google best places to work. And you'd go through that list, and you're going to hear about great cultures, great environments, all this kind of stuff. And you search the first 100, you're not going to find a single government agency. You're not going to find a comm center. You're not going to find a police department. You're not going to find a corrections facility. You're probably not even going to find an EMS provider in that list. And you're going to keep scrolling. You're going to get down to the thousands, and you're probably still not going to see anyone on that list. And I think in the future, if we have our way, if Agency 360, if we can execute on what we want to do, you're going to start to see police departments on that list. You're going to start to see dispatch centers on that list.
I not only do I agree, I think that's an amazing goal to have. I mean, when I look at millennials hiring into law enforcement too, I'm like, we should be perfectly made for them. They want to be a part of something special, and there's nothing more special than law enforcement. Yet we've done such a terrible job over the years of telling our stories and letting other people tell those stories and letting other people describe what we are instead of us. So many people don't realize just how big an impact you can make day-to-day lives on your community, on your family, on your friends, and how important it is in law enforcement. I don't think there's anything more special you could do. But as you said, we're not on any of those great special places to work.
And kudos to you too, Steve. You're a part of that mission too with your podcast here. The work you're doing here is helping us move in that direction as well.
What some people might not know is that you're a driving force behind this podcast. Last year, when I decided to do this, I sat at home and I wanted to do something. And so the podcast was created to kind of keep doing what I was doing because of COVID wouldn't let me go out and do it. You wanted to help. And I said, what do you want to do? And you said, we want to sponsor. And you've been amazing. So let's talk about the podcast. What are your thoughts on it?
It's been great. I mean, the other thing we're struggling with the high turnover in the industry is we're losing all of that knowledge. You got people 20 years experience, 30 years of experience, leaving these organizations to be replaced by someone who's been there 5 years and is going to be gone in 3.
Yeah, pretty common.
And what's great about the podcast is you're sharing that knowledge, and hopefully it adds to the book of wisdom out there for all departments and all officers.
What was your eye-opening moment with the podcast?
The bank robber episode with Ed.
Oh, the Ed Morales episode with the FBI, 1984 FBI Miami shootout. Yeah.
That one was pretty eye-opening because here's a story that you thought every police officer knows this story. I've been in the industry for, I was officer 11, 12 years, and I don't remember that story. So it was great to hear it and for you to share that knowledge. That was kind of cool to use this as education, as a history lesson. So we get into this industry and all we know is what we've seen on TV. What you bring is not just knowledge about what's going on, but you bring that background of why is it like this? How did it become like this?
The biggest thing I think I've tried to push is that I like history anyway. It sticks in my head. It's something that helps frame what I do next. And so history has always been a pretty big part of my thought process. And so it's been a big part of, for me anyway, within the podcast, is try to bring some of that information. Had such a wonderful time talking to Ed. What a fantastic, wonderful person. So it was a great, and it was just a blast for me. I was a little bit of a fanboy going into it, being so familiar with that shootout and what he did in that, and being a use of force instructor, my own firearms instructor. That was always something that I really, really enjoyed hearing about. So it was a blast listening to him talk.
How about you? What, any insights from the podcast?
I tell stories at heart. I think I learn from stories, and I think people can learn from stories. And so I have to keep those stories on point. I think we roll back to episode 9, which is the episode just before this. That was one that, while I've loved talking to Ed, while I've loved all of the interviews, the podcast that I did with talking to wives of police officers, that thing really resonated. It hit this kind of emotional note that I didn't expect. I wasn't planning on it, but I have a hard time listening to that without getting a little bit emotional. And that's the one I'm really getting a lot of feedback on. People are really relating to that one.
What was cool about that is it went back to the origin of why you wanted to do this, of getting stories about law enforcement out there that maybe people don't know. Maybe, they haven't thought about it from that perspective.
Anybody listening, I'd love to have people come and give me what you want to talk about, because this is all about sharing your stories. And so getting that information is helpful. And also looking at a few of the other sides of law enforcement, the dispatch side, that I would like to deal a little with, talking to dispatchers and even the correction side and the officers that are involved in the corrections. So I definitely am not just sticking to the cops on the road, but everybody involved in law enforcement, because we're one big unhappy family sometimes. And I think we all have stories to tell. Thank you for joining. As always, I'm curious what questions you're getting asked. What isn't the news covering? What story needs to be told? Connect with me at bluecanarypodcast@gmail.com.